All right, here we are, the big one, the cool one, the most important one to all of us. The Great Plains Conference. This was besides the Southwestern Conference, this was why I wanted to do this. There's too many weird conference splits. Whether you're talking about Nebraska or Colorado moving, which again, we didn't keep Colorado in this, but the Big 12 as kind of like this north to south strip of America. Mizzou is in the Southeastern Conference instead of playing the Kansas schools and the Iowa schools. There's things that could change here, and there's things that can change for the better. And so that's what we wanted to do. And another really awesome thing about this, Iowa and Iowa State, same division, so we can move their game.
From the second week of the season.
Exactly. Now, when you actually stop and think about it for a second, you can keep Iowa, Nebraska on Thanksgiving weekend, but if you put Iowa, Iowa State on either end of that, which I would say both fan bases want to play that game more towards the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Rivalry games in almost any sport, a college sport, you try to schedule them towards the end of the year. Rivalry week in college basketball is, I'm pretty sure, more than halfway through the conference schedule.
Well, yeah, Michigan, Ohio State play last game this season.
Exactly.
Clemson, South Carolina last game this season.
So we want that.
Yeah.
We want that.
Why not? Yeah.
We don't want it in September. Well, I mean, the tailgating is a lot better in September. But if it could even move around, and not be anchored, I think it would help both schools. And I think it would be more fun.
And with that, and then having Nebraska in the same division, like we mentioned before, you can have that three-pronged rivalry where they all are competing against each other because they're all recruiting against each other now.
Exactly.
And, I mean, Nebraska and Iowa kind of already do that now, but now you add in Iowa State, so it's a whole different dimension to it. Like, I love the idea of bringing in North Dakota State because...
Yeah. So let's do it. The most important the most important division to our listeners of this entire thing is the Great Plains West. The Great Plains West, we have North Dakota State, Minnesota, Iowa, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, and Nebraska. So our Midwest people, this is it. Think about these teams together. And now let's dive into, back to you, Jake, North Dakota State.
Well, I think it's an obvious choice just because they've beaten other teams in this division.
They've beaten multiple teams.
Actually, the only teams that they haven't beaten in this division are the two teams that haven't played them, and that's Minnesota and Nebraska. They've beaten Iowa, Iowa State, Kansas, and Kansas State. So they've shown they can be competitive against those teams. I think that's a big thing. And you can start a rivalry with Minnesota.
Yes.
And you can establish that.
It'd be a great border rivalry. It would be their only real border rivalry, but I feel like North Dakota State would probably pick up a lot more fans in the state of South Dakota, being a higher tier school.
Yeah. And I love the idea of having that little rivalry there. And it would be a very competitive division, I think. Because when you look at it on paper, you look
very competitive.
You look in, I would say, Iowa, Iowa State, Nebraska. I think they're all believable. But North Dakota State is the one I think would be the surprise, constant, like up towards the. If they don't win it, they're in second place. Right. They're always going to be competing for.
So I have a really fun stat for you. So there would be rivalry trophies created by this, like Minnesota, North Dakota State.
Sure.
That would probably get a rivalry trophy. They'd make something out of it. But as of right now...
Like a frozen gopher or something.
Right. This is a 14-team conference. And between these 14 teams, as of this day, right now, there are 14 rivalry trophies. That includes things like the CyHawk trophy or the Lamar Hunt trophy. Well, no, I didn't count that one because it's not right now. But the CyHawk trophy would now be within the same conference. All of these conference teams should be together in this Midwestern Conference.
I have one question, though. Actually, two questions. Do we have the $5 bits of broken share trophy between Nebraska and Minnesota? Do we add that in?
If it's you trophy,
have it.
Yeah.
You got to keep it. Everything
always
is
there.
All the rivalries are grandfathered.
Nebraska Wisconsin Freedom Trophy
when they play each other. Because we'll get into the anchored rivalries.
To me, that's an anchor rivalry, is Nebraska-Wisconsin.
Now,
late in the year, too.
Okay, and so now just to briefly go over it, before we get into the anchored rivalries.
I don't know about that. You'd have to take Minnesota-Wisconsin.
See, that's it. And I'm going to explain why I did these, because there's some that people are going to disagree with. The East, there's Wisconsin, Illinois, Northern Illinois, and Northwestern. Mizzou, Indiana, and Purdue. Now, again, East-West is not actually literal because, I put Mizzou in the East and I put Minnesota in the West. That's because of the rivalries that it can create and the rivalries that you have anchored. So even though, Iowa State and Mizzou have a rivalry trophy, it's called the Telephone Trophy. Look it up.
So does Nebraska and Missouri. They have the victory bell.
Yes, but what is the most important rivalry to Mizzou fans within this? It's going to be the border war, the border war that's been played for over 100 years against Kansas. And so that is also why the anchored rivalry
if you put that in Arrowhead Stadium every year. It's a neutral site game in Arrowhead
Sign
Stadium.
Me up.
Only way I will allow that.
Sign me up if Kansas can play.
Because you know how much fun? Because I guarantee you all three of us would go to KC, go to Power and Light and watch that game.
Oh, Power and Light is super fun, and I love going there to watch sports.
It'd be an excuse for us to go once a year, go get trashed.
Yeah, but that's the most important game to fans of those fan bases, which is why it's probably most important to keep Minnesota, Wisconsin, because there's Iowa fans that would say, hey, why not Iowa, Wisconsin? That's the Big Ten West
Nebraska
rivalry.
Fans.
Well, Nebraska fans say that out of hubris because one of their games against each other actually mattered.
Good point.
Ouch.
Once. One time, and Wisconsin blew them out.
And so, but it's the same minor argument of, well, we think our game against them matters. Well, to them, which game against them more matters? And
I just think
if
that
you ask
K-State,
Wisconsin fans, they might say Iowa, but I think most of them would say it's the trophy with Minnesota.
The problem is K-State and Nebraska get the shaft here.
So these other anchored rivalries,
they suck.
The worst one, I'm really sorry. I just couldn't find a way to give them a good one, but it's North Dakota State's got to go to Illinois every year and vice versa. There's just no way to get them a border rival, and you had to give Wisconsin to Minnesota. So the closest one, we're given Illinois to North Dakota State, but then they make more sense. Iowa Northwestern, got to keep that one because it's a wild card, right, Brandon?
Yeah, it's been a crazy game back and forth for 4 or 5 years now.
You never know. It's like Iowa State, Kansas State. Yeah. Anything goes.
Something
wild's
going
to happen. Yep. Yeah, somebody's going to miss an extra point.
Again, I'm going to stump for Nebraska here and say that they should have Northwestern.
You're 0 for 2. You're 0 for 2.
Because here's why. Because the matchup with Northwestern, the last 2 years alone has gone into overtime, and Nebraska colossally effed themselves last year. It's always a wild game, and usually the team on the road wins in this series. I think it's an interesting exchange, and they both have ends on their helmet. That's a fun little thing.
And he just doesn't want to play Purdue.
I'm really
I hate it.
We getting to the root of the problem. I understand. I'm sorry, Nebraska fans.
I'll take Indiana over
Purdue. Doesn't. If you want to switch that, I literally made that was what it came down to. The last anchored rivalries that I couldn't figure out. Some of these are easy puzzle pieces. Some are harder ones. Kansas State and Nebraska. I was like, where are they going? And I didn't choose Nebraska, Indiana because of the colors. And if you would rather play Indiana than Purdue, I will happily switch.
Hoosiers, Huskers, man. Hoosiers,
Huskers. It works. You got to say it like that. But,
only if it's like the Double H trophy or something like that.
The okay thing is that's an anchored rivalry that could kind of be changed in this. There's some that need to be these two no matter what, like Washington State, or Wisconsin, Minnesota. But there are some of these that don't really matter, but you can change if you think there's a better way to develop a rivalry. Like, send Nebraska to Indiana instead of Purdue. What's the difference?
Well, they're both in Indiana, so
both
nothing.
right next to each other.
Exactly. No, that's the point. So, sorry to keep you waiting on the Iowa State one. Iowa State versus Northern Illinois. From a competition standpoint, maybe they're not quite on Iowa State's level now, but it is a border rivalry, and you can build something there.
Northern Illinois beat Nebraska. They could beat Iowa State.
What does that mean? Troy beat Nebraska.
That's my point.
Second Troy mention outside of their conference in this episode.
Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why they were mentioned both.
So then,
why were they mentioned both times, Paul?
So as we mentioned before, Kansas and Missouri would have their anchored rivalry, and then Mizzou fans are like, oh, they don't. It was hard to give them a lot of border rivalries within their division, putting them in the East, but they're guaranteed Kansas every year. And if you just rotate it so that they play Kansas, Iowa State, Nebraska on alternating years, they do still have those games that are important to them because Iowa State and Nebraska have trophies against Mizzou. But then there are schools on the east that they can start building east side of the state, like St. Louis to the Illinois border with their more divisional rivals. So Mizzou's one that's kind of along for the ride to make this work, but when you dig deeper into it, they are still going to benefit because they have these every year border games and new rivalries to create.
Well, a lot better than going to Florida.
A lot better than getting destroyed in like every SEC thing ever.
I mean,
the SEC East.
It won't be every year, but it is something to get to play Nebraska every couple of years.
No matter what you say about how I put Mizzou in this, it's better than how they are now.
Right, exactly. They'll still get to play a couple rivalries in game. You know, they'll still get to play Iowa State a few times.
So we really like Arrowhead for a championship. I'm gonna give an alternate to that.
I think Chicago.
Yes,
I like Chicago.
Brandon, you're there for me.
I love Chicago.
Soldier Field as kind of a midway point because then you still keep those Big Ten East. You keep the Illinois, Indiana.
Yeah, I was
you
gonna
keep
say,
those
Kansas
fans
City's
happy.
in the corner of
Kansas
the
City's
it's closer. Not really in the middle.
Right. Soldier Field is a lot more
What about
central.
Lucas Oil Stadium?
That is.
It's a little east. It's kind of the same argument as Kansas City.
I actually think that Indianapolis is further east than Indiana or Purdue, which means that stadium would actually be outside the realm of the physical conference.
That's what I mean. Yeah, it's kind of like Kansas City where it's on the corner, where it wouldn't really be. It's not centralized at all.
No, I'm just saying Arrowhead is a neutral site game every year for. Like, you could start the season.
For the Lamar Hunt Trophy, you can have that at Arrowhead every year. You can have Iowa and Northwestern at
Paul, listen to me. Listen to
Chicago.
me. Listen to me.
It's Soldier Field every year.
Listen to me.
You can have Wisconsin, Minnesota alternate between US Bank Stadium and Lambeau. It works.
Interesting.
That's not what I'm saying. What I was saying was you could literally start the year, the kickoff weekend before the Chiefs play in Arrowhead. You could have the border war in Arrowhead. Like they did that one year when LSU and Wisconsin played each other at Lambeau.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of works for that joke you're making. It kind of works if you want to like start the season with that because Colorado State and Colorado play in Mile High every year.
You could do a really cool conference opening weekend where you have
NFL
set games that are like in neutral sites all across all conferences, which would be really cool.
It'd be like college basketball to start the season. That's what they do a lot of the time.
Oh, right.
The big schools
they play on the battleship
and stuff like
or
that.
the aircraft carrier. Yeah. A few things to finish up. The best conference in this whole restructure. You know, North Dakota State does have some like financial and like legal barriers to be able to have a Division I football team. They need more school sponsored intramural sports. But I think that the promise of this jump in football revenue would be able to create a lacrosse team or a women's diving team or whatever you need to do to meet the new restrictions to have this level of competition. That was something that I actually researched, is how to have a viable argument to have North Dakota State make this jump, because talent-wise, they're there.
Yeah.
They can compete. They definitely can compete, and they've shown it because they've beat these schools. They're 4-0 against these division rivals.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
The only ones that they haven't played.
They haven't beat them because they haven't played them.
Right. Minnesota and Nebraska have never played them.
I bet with Minnesota, it's we don't want to play them because there's no benefit to us playing them. Like what we talked about last week with Bill Self saying, I don't want to play Wichita State. They're going to get better recruits if they beat me. They're going to storm their court, or they're going to beat me on my home court. There's no reason. But now Minnesota's got to play them. So I think this Great Plains Conference would just create so much more entertainment from a mid-level team's fan perspective. Like me as an Iowa State fan, I'm so much more down for my divisional games against Nebraska and Iowa than I am. Do you know why Iowa and West Virginia play at the end of every season? It's because they are the closest geographic team. Ames is the closest geographically to Huntington, West Virginia. So put that in perspective and how stupid these conferences are as we currently see them. That West Virginia's closest opponent in the Big 12 is Iowa State. Why do I care about that game? Why should I care? I don't care about that game. I care about Northern Illinois. I care about Northwestern. I care about Minnesota. You know why? Because those are states bordering my state.
They're competing for recruits with.
That at any gas station, I can look at someone with that sweatshirt in superiority because my team beat your team. I don't care if I see West Virginia fans as it is now. You know,
you never do.
You never do. No, or a TCU fan. You know, I don't feel anything towards them like I could feel against these. Like a lot of these schools, even the Big Ten East schools, are creating new rivalries, like Illinois and Northwestern. Northwestern's already got these border rivalries.
Or, you know, like a anchored rival between Northwestern and Nebraska. That'd be cool.
You'd literally drive through Iowa City for that. Do you realize that?
Worth it.
You would take I-80 through Iowa City.
Right past Kinnick Stadium.
Right. To go to Chicago and Northwestern.
Mm-hmm. I'm all for it. Totally.
Nebraska fans. They can't see outside the bubble. And you love them for it.
I don't care about Indiana or Purdue. I don't care.
Illinois? We can wheel and deal. What about Illinois?
Illinois? Oh my God.
What's the difference? What's the difference from Illinois to Northwestern?
Northwestern's a better team. Illinois is terrible.
So you just think of it as how your school is perceived based on who their anchored rival is.
Illinois has not been competitive with Nebraska.
Shout out to our fans in Champaign.
Even as bad as Nebraska. Well, I guess they did beat Nebraska once. One time out of 6.
Hey, it counts.
Dude. If Maryland beats Iowa one time out of 6,
Ohio State's beat Michigan like 6 years in a row. So what's the difference?
This is not even anywhere near comparable. Illinois and Nebraska.
But you just said that it shouldn't be a rivalry because they've won 5 out of 6. Well, that's my point. Ohio State's beat Michigan 5 out of 6.
No, what I'm saying is when Nebraska has beaten Illinois, it's always been double digits. It's never been competitive. And the one time Illinois won, it was by a point. And with Ohio State, last year it wasn't competitive, but almost every time they've played Michigan in the last 6 wins they've had, they've been very competitive, close games. So what I'm saying is Illinois and Nebraska, they just don't mesh.
I hear what you're saying, but you know, realistically, with the options that you're being given, if you're Nebraska's athletic director, from the rivalries that have to be kept from a neutral fan's perspective, you are given the choice of Illinois, Indiana, or Purdue, or, you know, Northern Illinois, and Iowa State can play Illinois. You want Northern Illinois?
No, they beat us.
So you don't want the team that beats you,
but you want the team.
But you don't want the team that's worse than you in your mind from the team that started 0-5 or 0-6. 0-6.
Only lost by 5 points.
You've got to put it in. You've got to. This is not the 90s.
I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying.
Stop thinking of your team like they are.
When you want to put eyeballs to screens, I'm sorry, but Indiana and Nebraska ain't fucking doing it. It's the first time I swore on podcast. I'm proud of myself. And Purdue and Nebraska isn't doing it. Nebraska, Missouri, maybe.
None of those.
No. Actually, Nebraska, Missouri.
Nebraska, Missouri could, but Mizzou's
Nebraska
playing
and
Kansas.
Northwestern. That sounds fun. Something entertaining to watch.
We could do that.
Wisconsin,
sure.
Nebraska. They're interesting.
You want Northwestern?
No, I don't want Northwestern.
Just as a pacifier. To move on to the Ohio River Valley.
On principle, I will not accept
it. It's the Nebraska man. Okay, you got a Packer timer for when he and I get going. Your Nebraska clock is up.
Everything else is fine. The division itself is fine. I think it's structured well. We get to play Iowa State, Iowa every year.
So why does it matter if your anchored rivalry is
perfect, dude? The Great Plains West is perfect.
So why does it matter if your anchored rivalry isn't so great?
Because I would like to see Nebraska,
it's because
Missouri
he thinks he has more prestige than an 0-6 starting team deserves.
Iowa State makes a bowl in a couple of years, and they're fucking elite, man. I'm sorry. So mad about this whole conference. It's ruined because you don't get a good anchor rivalry. You made me cuss. I was doing so well not swearing this whole thing, and then you made me cuss.
All right.
Now it's out. I'm going to drop F-bombs this whole time. This is only for long form listeners.
Moving to the other. Hey, guys, thanks for listening to our in-depth analysis on how to restructure college football. If you want to hear all conferences, you can hear the other installments of this on the Loud Sports Podcast or the long form on the Loud Sports Podcast, or you can read it on my website at cornfedmedia.org.